Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy, and in this podcast, Josh and I are going to go over 8 players that I think are clear sells in the Dynasty market right now. Let's get it. Well, hello everybody. Welcome in. And of course, I have my other best friend Josh with me here. Josh, it has been a hot minute since you and I have been on. It's been a hot minute since we talked. You've been taking a well-deserved sabbatical after running rolling lines pretty much solo for the majority of last year. So how you been, man? And are you excited to talk some fantasy again?
I'm doing well. I'm refreshed. I'm glad to be back. I got my Vinny Tro shirt on, fresh out of the
Nice.
packaging. After that bar down snipe
Mm-hmm.
the other night. It's kind of I'm kind of wearing it in memoriam to
Yeah.
for his awesome playoff performance that's now over. But gotta shout out our friend of the show. Gotta support him in some way. But yeah, no, I'm doing good. I feel very good. I feel like taking a break after the hustle and bustle of the season is always a little bit necessary, except if your name's Blake Creamer, in which case you just keep going full steam. But that I don't have the energy for that. So, but yeah, I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's dive right into it. The first name that I want to talk about has a sell in your Dynasty or Deep Keeper formats is Mackenzie Weegar. So obviously it's a big season for Weegar on the otherwise hapless Flames. Had 20 goals, 52 points. I'm gonna talk through some positives and negatives for each of these players. I'm not gonna try to say that everything was terrible about each one of these players. There's obviously a reason that I think you can actually sell on these players. There are some positives about the seasons that they had. So positives for Uyghur. The ice time climbed. He had 2105 in 2022-23. Last year up to 2255. So definitely added a bunch of ice time this past season, almost 2 minutes there. And an extra minute of that was on the power play, and particularly in the second half of the season where you're seeing power play one with some regularity. Posted the highest shots per 60 rate ever, second highest individual scoring chances for per 60 ever throughout his career, and also the highest Corsi for per 60 of his career. So good numbers there. And obviously, we know Mackenzie Weegar, one of the reasons that people love him is if you're in a bangers league, he's an absolute monster with all the hits and the block shots. He actually had a massive upswing in block shots this year, which really propelled him to another level. If you're in a league like a couple that adds some extra points for block shots relative to hits, then he actually really becomes kind of overpowered for the season that he had. So huge season in terms of the actual points scored for Weegar and the fantasy points scored as well, obviously. The negatives here, from my perspective, I think the luck metrics are pretty clearly showing that he's likely to regress here. He had an IPP of 47%. Only his 54 game 2020-21 season was higher. Outside of these two seasons, he's been right around 40% for most of his career. So that feels like more of the baseline of where we would expect Uyghur to be would be roughly 7% lower in terms of his individual points percentage, how much he's factoring into the goals that are being scored while he's on the ice. He had a career high 9.7% shooting percentage last year. Obviously, you're going to have to be pretty efficient to get to 20 goals as a defenseman. He was definitely that. The last 3 seasons before this, 5.9%, 3.9%, 2.5% the year before this. And so the 9.7% shooting percentage feels like a pretty clear outlier. And then the career high on ice shooting percentage here as well. 10.9%. Previous 3 seasons, 10.8%, 10.6%, 7.5%. So definitely like within the realm of where you would expect, but also consider that he was on Florida before and he's still on Calgary last time I checked. So yeah, what do you think of Weegar overall, Josh? Do you agree with the take overall? Do you have any other points that maybe I'm missing in my assessment here?
Yeah, I definitely do agree overall. I have mixed feelings in a Bangers Cats whether or not I would
Right.
want to move off him. But actually, in fact, I at the deadline last year, I did sell him in a Bangers Cats Dynasty League, feeling that his value was at an absolute high. At the time, he had right before the trade deadline in this league, he'd been on power play one for an extended period of time. So and was putting up really good numbers. Was one of the best defensemen in that league format. So I think I dealt him for like Sean Dursey, a first round pick, and something else. I can't remember what it was, but
Nice.
tried to maximize the value as much as I could. I don't know if I actually did or not, but it, I yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think yeah, the biggest concern for me with Weegar is no guaranteed power play time. You've still got
Mhm.
Rasmus Anderson there for another couple of years under contract, and I don't really see them moving off of him either. They seem pretty high on him. I don't really see anyone else coming up that is going to push for that time. So it'll
Right.
probably be those two guys and whoever else they get in the off season. So I mean, like you said, it seems like this is probably his ceiling. We saw a year like this in his last year with Florida. Obviously, didn't have as much power play time, but he did fill in for Aaron Ekblad when he was injured at times. So, yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't feel great in a Bangers
Yeah.
catch just because he's such a monster. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think if you want to maximize the value of your asset, you're probably best to move off of Weegar at this point.
Yeah, I think like the guy's 30 as well, right?
Hmm.
Some people might be thinking he's younger still just because he hasn't been like a bigger name until much more recently. But a guy who's 30 coming off a career season, the shooting percentage especially, like I would be shocked if he ever touched 20 goals again, even if he does get all the power play time in the world. I know they gave him a big contract, but yeah, just feels like this is probably the absolute peak for Mackenzie Weegar and the absolute peak in terms of dynasty value. You could probably get a pretty big haul as you're able to there. So let's move on. Let's talk about Sam Reinhart. Contract year narrative definitely working for Reinhart this year as he popped off for 57 goals, 94 points, including an absolutely ridiculous 27 power play goals. Yeah, just crazy stuff from Sam Reinhart. I will note, like, he has always been a wildly efficient shooter on the power
Hmm.
play. Like, he's done this before, basically,
Yep.
in terms of the shooting percentage. And obviously, he has Alexander Barkov there. It really seems like the Panthers just kind of changed their power play a little bit this year, turned things to focus on that Reinhardt shot, that bumper position play where he was always open. Barkov would draw the coverage, as only Barkov and maybe like Sidney Crosby and a few other guys across the league can actually do. And Reinhardt was clearly the beneficiary there. And they kind of deprioritized Brandon Montour, which kind of ruined my take on Montour there. But either way, it was definitely a big season for Reinhardt. What do you see from Reinhardt? Do you think that, um, well, let's start. Do you think he resigns in Florida? Because obviously that has a
Yeah.
big impact on what we're doing here. What's your take there?
By the sounds of things, by like what I've heard just from people around the league, like Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick and people like that, it sounds like I mean both the player and the team want to resign. I think they'll probably work it out. It's a tax-free state. I think
Yeah,
they'll probably figure he'll take a discount. He'll probably uh I mean, he'll probably go sign for like $9 million, something just below
yeah,
Barkov, and I don't know, right off into the sunset in Florida. So, I mean, that's just the way things go. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, you're seeing it. You said it seems like they've changed up the power play to prioritize Reinhardt. In the playoffs, you're seeing it as well. I believe he has 7 power play goals in the playoffs already as well. So he's been unbelievable. And like you said, 2 years ago, when he was point per game in his first year in Florida, he had a crazy shooting percentage on the power play as well. Just 5v5, he was playing third line with Anton Lundell, as opposed to first line with Sasha Barkov and sometimes Carter Verhaeghe. So I really like the situation for Reinhart, if he resigns in Florida. Even if he doesn't, I think he's going to get, I mean, the absolute best opportunity possible after this year. But like you said, don't really see what's his overall shooting percentage this year. It was like 27%.
24.46%.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, there's no way he repeats that again. So I mean, I think you selling high on your asset here is probably I mean, like I said about Weegar, it's probably in your best interest.
Yeah, just to put that shooting percentage number in context, this year at 24.5%, first 2 seasons in Florida, he was at 17.7% and 13.7%. He's definitely been that guy who can convert at a high efficiency clip, especially on the power play. Man, you look across his last 4 years, would you believe that this past season was actually his second worst of the last 4 years? 43.5, 40% on the dot, 21.9%, and then 33.75% this past year. Absolutely unbelievable. Across multiple teams there as well, going back 4 years. So crazy stuff from Sam Reinhart. I do think that you can expect some pretty significant efficiency on that power play. I do think he will resign there. He got 20 minutes, 17 seconds a night this past season. Matched his career high, 8.4 shots per 60, 10.7 individual scoring chances for per 60, both perfectly in line with what he did the previous season. He had a career high in terms of his on-ice Corsi for percentage, on ice Corsi for per 60, that is, and almost sustained last year's on ice scoring chances for per 60. Just across the board, really good numbers from Sam Reinhart, about as good as you could expect. I do think this season was definitely the high watermark, and that's why I think it is a spot where you can sell him if somebody in your league is maybe thinking that this is a late year or late career breakout from Sam Reinhart. Probably you want to wait for him to actually resign before you try to move off him, but yeah, the career high IPP at 72%, first 2 seasons in Florida at 64 and 60%, so definitely you could expect some regression coming there. Shooting percentage obviously high, as I mentioned, although I do think he's going to sustain a high shooting percentage. And the on-ice shooting percentage this year was at 12.4%. His first 2 seasons in Florida were kind of all over the place. The first season was at 13.8%, which was wild, and 10.1% last year. So it's hard to find exactly where the middle is on that, but I do think 12.4% might be a touch high for Sam Reinhart. Definitely going to be dependent on Barkov to maintain that. So, at this point, you do have to bake in some chance that he's not resigned as well if negotiations happen to go south. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen something like that happen. You're just definitely not going to find a better opportunity elsewhere. So if you want to remove even whatever percentage chance that risk is, then I guess you could move off him now. But I think the absolute peak time to move him will be right after he signs a huge contract with the Florida Panthers and gets tied to Alexander Barkov for the foreseeable future. I think you'll probably be able to get a pretty penny for him. Probably get somebody who will equal his production, honestly, for the next few years, and possibly get like a first round pick in the future on top of it. Like, I think that's a definitely a possible deal that you could get done. So I think Sam Reinhart, I haven't done projections yet, but I think I'm going to be projecting him for more like 40 goals next year, just based on the shooting percentage alone. I think that's going to be more where I'm going to expect Sam Reinhart to be in the future moving forward, and that's a much more replaceable number than obviously what he did this past season. So I think there's just going to be opportunities to move off that you'll really like the return price on. All right, next up, Brock Boeser. Similar kind of general trend to the season for Brock Boeser as it was with Sam Reinhart. Career year for him, 40 goals, 73 points in 81 games. Rebounded from 17-14 average time on ice the year before to 18-36 this year. Cemented his role on the top power play. Career highs, Corsi 4 per 60, scoring chances 4 per 60, the second highest individual scoring chances 4 per 60 of his career. His IPP was in line with his career numbers. What am I missing here, Josh? I'm obviously burying the lead lead here, but why do you think we might want to move on from Brock Bowers? Or Brock
Yeah,
Bowers,
yeah.
Brock Besser.
Brock
There's
Bowers.
my football best ball drafting is leaking into my fantasy hockey now.
There you go. Brock Besser. Well, I mean, leading into this season, we were talking about. I mean, Blake. Blake have been talking about how he believed that he could get to a 30 to 35 goal, 60-point area. And I think, honestly, all the years and all of the underlying stats leading up to the season kind of, I mean, it kind of showed that may be his ceiling, or that kind of may be the player that he's supposed to be. So the fact that he got
Yeah.
up to 40 and 73 points, I mean, you're gonna dive into it, but the underlying numbers are. He was running a little bit hot, but I do like that he has cemented his spot on power play one. I don't see that changing. I
Yeah.
don't imagine they're going to switch up the core very much in Vancouver going into next year. It's going to be more the peripheral players. But I think that though that unit of five, I mean, minus Elias Lindholm, is going to stay pretty much the same. So in that way, I think Boeser is probably a safe bet to get back up to 60 points. In terms of 40 goals, 73 points, I think that's a little hot for me. So anyways, you dive into the numbers here, Nate.
Sure. Yeah. So the negatives here with Brock Bowers are definitely the shooting percentage,
You did it again.
19.6%. Did I do it?
Yeah,
Oh
you
my
did it
gosh.
again.
That's hilarious. So yeah, for people who don't know, I'm deeply into the fantasy football best ball drafting streets, and Brock Bowers is a tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders, and apparently he's been on my mind. So Brock Besser, 19.6% shooting percentage this past year. That's not going to continue. His best in any season before was 16.3%. The last 2 years before this, 11.8 and 10.1. I think he is like a decently talented shooter. One of the things that I often like to look at to see if I think that the shooting percentage can remain at a higher clip is the ratio of shots per 60 to individual scoring chances for per 60. If a player has more individual scoring chances for per 60 than shots per 60, I do tend to think that they're an above average. They're at least paving the way for themselves to be an above average converter in terms of shooting percentage. And Brock Besser is definitely that. So he's got a 10.2 this past season, individual scoring chances for per 60 versus an 8.1 shots per 60. Pretty solid ratio there. So I do think that he's going to convert maybe like in the 14 to 15% range, could be somewhere where I could see myself landing in terms of projection on him, but definitely not 19.6 again. On ice shooting percentage this past year was absolutely astronomical at 14.9%. His previous career high was 12.6%. So yeah, I'd have him regressing back down to somewhere in that range, most likely, even with the extra deployment, extended power play one time. I don't think he's likely to get above 13% on ice shooting percentage next year. So that's obviously going to cut some off the top here. The IPP is definitely in line with where he's been, but it's not high IPP. He's never been that guy to like command the offense. He's definitely more of the like sniper kind of what do you want to call it? Like the genre of player, if you want to call it that. That's kind of more of his role, and definitely not a guy who's going to like hang on to the puck and make all the plays. They've got people there who do that. So I think that Besser overall is just going to be a guy that I'm going to be fading in drafts next year. I think most likely scenario is that he kind of more is what we thought he was, and he's more in that 60 to 65 point range. Probably 35 goals again wouldn't surprise me. 30 to 35 goals is definitely within the cards for him, but expecting him to do 40 goals and 70 to 75 points again, I think will be a little rich. And so in that case, I think this is probably the best time to move off of Brock Besser here. He's only 27, so it's not like he's like running out of time in terms of his age cliff or something like that. But I think that this is probably the best season we're likely to see out of Brock Besser. And so it makes for a good exit point if you can get something really valuable. Again, it could be a similar situation to Sam Reinhart where you can trade him, get something on top, get the same production from a similar player at a similar age, but also get something on top. And those are the kind of deals I want to be making as a dynasty manager. All right, from Brock Boeser over to his teammate JT Miller. A lot of the same things are going to be true here for JT Miller. That on ice shooting percentage is definitely up there. It's the reason he got up to 37 goals, 103 points in 81 games. Definitely a career year for JT Miller. Nobody's going to dispute that. Yeah, the 15.6% on ice shooting percentage, just absolutely ridiculous. This is in the realm of that Ryan Nugent Hopkins on ice shooting percentage we talked about last year, and we all saw what happened with RNH this year. He also shot 19.1% himself. That's definitely an outlier. His last 3 seasons, 14.2%, 15.5%, 14.4%, and now 19.1%. So definitely back similar to Brock Boeser in that 14 to 15% range is probably where median projection should land on him. What do you think about Miller? Is this a spot where you'd be looking to move off Miller, or is he just too valuable? Again, one of these guys much more valuable in a bangers league as well.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for you to be able to get the proper value back for JT Miller. He's a great playmaker. His assist numbers, I think, are sustainable. Like he's done this for a few years in a row now. But yeah, that 37 goal number is crazy for a guy that doesn't shoot a ton. That's something that's not thought about a lot, because you think about him as being a bangers cats monster with the hits, and especially in leagues with face-off wins, he just has a little bit more value. Not to mention in Fantrax, I believe he's try eligible, so that's extremely valuable. But it's he's not a high volume shooter, like a lot like his shot numbers are similar to like a Leon Draisaitl, maybe even a little bit lower, but obviously without the same efficiency. But although this year he did shoot like Leon Draisaitl, so it's but that's not something you can expect from this guy. But again, he's a guy. He's one of those guys that I think in a bangers cats could go late first round, and he'll probably return you that value. So that's a tough guy to replace. So, but like you said, 31 years old. So if you're looking at it younger, if you're not necessarily in a spot where you're going to compete for a championship in this next year, it probably is the time to move off of JT Miller. But yeah, I think I wouldn't blame you for hanging on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And definitely, I'm not saying to like go out and move him for like whatever the first offer that comes your way is, right? We definitely want to be cognizant of the fact that he is providing a ton of production. Even if it's not this good, it's obviously going to be really good production. We're still drafting him. Like, I drafted him on my winning team this past year for the Fantasy Puck League in the back end of the second round, and he was obviously an absolute stud there. If you're in like in a cap league, right, like the $8 million that he's making is not that bad, and potentially might not even be that bad all the way till the end of the contract through his age 36 season. So you have to take that into account if you're in a cap league. That conversely, you could also say that makes him pretty valuable as a trade chip. So if you are in a situation where maybe you're rebuilding or retooling, you need to add more depth or take more shots on prospects or things like that, then JT Miller should absolutely land you the bag in terms of what he could net you in terms of a return. So I think that JT Miller makes some sense. I'm not saying to sell him for the first thing that comes along, but I do think that this is probably the best thing that we're going to see from him. One more thing I do want to note as well, the ice time here dropped. So the previous 3 seasons, he'd been in the 21-minute range, and this past season, he was down to 19:30. So on top of that, he's also fighting a losing battle in terms of the actual time that he's on the ice a little bit. And so he's going to have to maintain efficiency to be to return this kind of value, as his ice time is apparently being dropped under Rick Tocchet a little bit. So that's just one more point in the bucket. I'm not against keeping JT Miller, but if you can get an absolute haul for him after a career year, I think that you'd be wise to at least investigate that possibility. All right, next up, Anze Kopitar. Another year, another 70-point season for this ageless wonder. He's going to turn 37 before the start of training camp this year. I mean, the guy's still line one, power play one. Last time we checked, IPP this past year is actually the lowest of his entire career. So he obviously wasn't even that efficient in terms of his individual points percentage. Corsi 4 per 60, second best of the last 5 years. You got Quinton Byfield emerging, who's been one of his most frequent line mates this past year. Could buoy him, even if Kopitar becomes more of a passenger, could Byfield be the driver, and Kopitar just remains productive for a few more seasons alongside that. That's definitely a possibility. What's your overall take? What's your overall temperature on Anze Kopitar, and maybe just about the template in general, right? Like, you're talking about a guy who's getting up to the end, even in a spot where you're contending. If you're contending, are you just hanging on to Kopitar because like you're not going to get that much for him, and so you'd rather just have the production, or is there still like some scenarios that you want to explore just to get something of value before he totally ages out?
Yeah, I think we're at the point now at 37 where you're looking to move off of the guy, especially. I mean, his underlying numbers weren't amazing this past year. They're starting to decline a little bit. I would say even I was trying to move him the previous season, the previous off season in one of my dynasty leagues. And I didn't have as much success as I had hoped. But I think that I totally support moving off of Kopitar just because of the age. And like you said, like you've got Byfield emerging. Byfield does play center. So if for whatever reason they feel like they need to move Kopitar down the lineup, I mean, you've got a guy waiting in the wings that's ready to go. So obviously they looked good together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the way it looks going forward. So I think selling high here on Kopitar is probably would probably be advised. I definitely support that.
Yeah, I'd kind of just view this particular scenario as like the exact time where I really want to sell, even on a contending team, is
Yeah.
where the metrics have all declined here. So I'll briefly run through it. But he posted the worst shots per 60 and individual scoring chances for per 60 of his career. His ice time has declined year over year for the last 3 years, starting at 2110, 2046, 2018, and now down to 1939 this past season. So he's definitely being used less and less and less as time passes here. I had those pretty bad individual metrics, as I mentioned, but he got there on the basis of just some outlandish efficiency. 19.6% shooting percentage. He's a 13.0% career shooter. That's obviously going to regress, and a career high 12.9% on ice shooting percentage. Definitely not been close to that in most of his previous seasons. So I think, yeah, like even without Byfield, they do have PLD, who I think people expect to have at least some sort of bounce back and be like a relevant fantasy hockey player at times next year. And Phil Deneau both behind him. Both guys have played top six roles with quite some success at different times throughout their careers. So I do think that they have options if Kopitar can't cut it anymore. It's not like he's going to just keep getting run out there for tons of minutes if he really is slowing down. And we do have evidence in the underlying metrics that he is slowing down. It's really just he got there on the shooting percentage, the on ice shooting percentage, all the rest of it. So I do think that this is most likely a case where we do see a decent drop off from Kopitar as soon as this season. And so this is really the spot where I want to be getting some value back for Kopitar before he goes to zero on my roster, right? You're not going to get anything for him once he really shows signs of point production decline. So getting out now when he still has the point production and people are still viewing him much the same as they did last season, I think is probably the right move overall. Let's move across to another teammate there, Drew Doughty. Yet another 50-point season, skating a ridiculous amount of minutes. That's pretty much what Drew Doughty does year in and year out. I mean, the positives are still like he's still getting that time, right? 25, 47 average time on ice. You have to go back to 2011, 2012 to find a year where he averaged less than 25 minutes a night. It was 24:53 that year. He's never, even going back to his rookie season was the least amount of time on ice that he ever posted posted, and that was 23 minutes and 49 seconds. He's been an absolute horse. Like, I actually don't know who else we could even compare him to in terms of entering the league, immediately being an absolute workhorse and staying that way every single season for his entire career and being this productive throughout an entire career. This past year, his IPP was not outlandish, maybe even a touch light. He had the second highest Corsi 4 per 60 of the past 10 years last year, so those are some good notes. But on the negative side, he did have the lowest shots per 60 of his career. He shot 11.1%. That's versus 7.9%, 7.1%, and 6.2% the 3 seasons prior to that. So definitely expect some regression on the shooting percentage. The 10.3% on ice shooting percentage in line with 2022-23 at 10.8%, but still high relative to his career. So if you believe that's just the Kings are pretty good now and that's the way it's going to go, then maybe you believe in that a little bit, but I tend to think that that could regress. And the biggest thing for me, really, I think, and the reason that I'm advocating a sell on Doughty right now is that they have Brandt Clarke, who scored 10 goals, 46 points in 50 AHL games this past season, waiting in the wings. I think Brandt Clarke is the guy of the future in terms, at least, of the power play in LA. He's one of the most offensively talented defensemen outside of the NHL right now, in my estimation. And so I do think that Brandt Clarke, as soon as this year, it could be like a Luke Hughes, Dougie Hamilton situation, which that one still shocks me, to be honest, because I still think Dougie Hamilton is terrific offensively. But I think Brandt Clarke, as soon as this year, could be pushing Drew Doughty out of power play one. And once he loses that power play, then you're really going to be hurting, I think, in terms of the overall point production. And that's when you're not going to be able to get the same value for him in dynasty trades. What are your thoughts on that and overall take on the power play situation as well?
Yeah, this is a guy that I believe last offseason, we had a similar episode, and I believe I did it with Binksy, and I identified Drew Doughty as a guy that could be potentially declining based on his underlying numbers, and it seems like that stayed pretty consistent. He's finding a way to get on the score sheet. He's kind of voluming his way just because of all the minutes that he has and the opportunity to staying relevant. But that's not going to last forever. I mean, it seems like it might. And based on Drew Doughty's personality, like, you're going to have to drag him off of power play one in order for Brandt Clarke to get that opportunity. But so yeah, Clarke was never really a threat this year. It seemed like they wanted to give him seasoning in the AHL. And Jordan Spence was the next guy up, and I don't really see his ceiling being anywhere close to playing on power play one. So but I could see Brandt Clarke being part of the lineup next year. You've got Matt Roy as a UFA. He plays on the right side, so it wouldn't surprise me for Brandt Clarke to kind of start slotting into the lineup and taking those minutes away from Doughty in those offensive situations. So I think absolutely this is the absolute best time to sell on Drew Doughty. Very similar to Anze Kopitar. You've got to move off this guy before he starts losing those minutes.
All right, let's keep rolling. Let's talk about Lucas Raymond here. He posted a career high 31 goals, 72 points in 82 games. I think a lot of people are viewing this as the breakout expected for Lucas Raymond in his third season in the NHL. And for my money, I think he may have gone over where I would expect him to be for his career now that we have, a 3-season sample. It's not to say that players don't improve after 3 seasons, but I'm starting to feel like we have a decent idea anyway of what this guy is. The positives here, I mean, the ice time climbed up to 1745 this year. He actually had the most ice time in his rookie season, 1809, then 1722 in 2022-23, and now 1745 this past season. Matched his rookie year individual scoring chances 4 per 60 at 7.7, and his Corsi 4 per 60 and scoring chances 4 per 60 numbers were career highs. So the on ice numbers looking solid there. Talk to me about the negatives with Lucas Raymond that you see, Josh. You can run through some of the efficiency stats as well.
Sure.
Do you agree with the take? Run through the stats, but tell me if you agree with the take overall, or if you're more interested in what Lucas Raymond could continue to develop into.
I 100% agree with the take. I've been on the Lucas Raymond as a passenger train for quite a while now. I mean, going back to me drafting him in his sophomore season the year before in the Cuffle and him doing absolutely nothing, and he's one of those guys that when he's not scoring, he's not bringing you any value whatsoever.
Right.
And I've never loved his underlying numbers. I mean, we'll jump into these numbers. His IPP was the highest of his career, 72%. In his first two seasons, he has 66% and 60%. So the IPP spiking a little bit, and I don't really see that continuing. His shooting percentage was up to 19.1% after 12.5% and 12.7% over his first 2 years. That is a massive jump.
Yeah.
So I that is nowhere near where I see Lucas Raymond sitting. And his on-ice shooting percentage was up from 10.7% to 12.3%. So another crazy jump there for Raymond. Yeah, I think as long as he's playing with Dylan Larkin, he's sitting pretty. But even then, like I just don't. I'm not a big Lucas Raymond guy right now. Like he's got to do a lot more to convince me that he's worth keeping on my fantasy roster. So yeah, I 100% would sell him.
Yeah, I think it really does feel to me like he is a bit of a passenger. I definitely agree with that sentiment. Just going by the numbers here, it feels like he ran really hot this year. The one thing that I would say as a caveat is that he could still take another step. Like he's not,
Yeah,
the story is not written completely on his career after 3 seasons in the NHL by any stretch. But it does feel like, at least so far throughout his career, there hasn't really been anything to hang our hats on to say that, he's taken another step here. Some people may view this season as that step just because of the point production, but the underlying numbers are not really suggesting that in my mind. I think of Alexis Lafreniere, who took a step this year, right? But his underlying numbers took that step along with his production. That's the difference to me, where we have this with Lucas Raymond, where the production's there, but the underlying numbers are not. So I think that in a case like this, where we're still kind of waiting 3 seasons in for him to take another step in terms of the underlying numbers and really show that he can drive play on his own away from Dylan Larkin, that's a player that I think I want to sell on after a really, really efficient season just across the board. So I think that this is probably a good moment where somebody's going to look at a guy who scored 72 points, 31 goals, a super young player, exciting player, and they're going to be willing to pay you a pretty penny for that player. I think you can probably replace that production and get a huge bonus on top of it in any kind of trade that you want to. All right, the last guy we have on the main list here, Matt Duchene, had a really strong 25 goals, 65-point season despite spending, I didn't do this number exactly, but I believe it was approximately 0 time on line one or power play one this year. Positives
I think he had
overall.
one game on power play one. He tricked
Yeah,
us.
I'm sure there was one somewhere, but it
Yeah,
was definitely not the constant state of affairs this year for
no.
Dallas. So yeah, Duchene, it's just a lot of things. It's one of these players, right? It's actually hard to project Duchene because you look back at his career and he's kind of yo-yoed around in terms of his efficiencies, and even his underlying numbers have yo-yoed around as well. It seems like there are some years where he's just like really feeling it for whatever reason, and so he goes off and the underlying numbers tick up and the percentages all tick up, and you're like, oh, maybe Matt Duchene is this guy. He can actually be a pretty high-end player given some time, and then the next season comes around and he disappoints you again just as you're starting to believe. So there is definitely that inconsistency to his game. We don't know where he's going to be playing next year at this point. Like, Dallas is obviously still playing in the playoffs. I mean, they're playing Edmonton right now. What's the game looking like? Are they almost
2-0 Edmonton.
Dallas might be almost done on their season,
Yeah.
but Duchene, I think I would put positive money on the fact that he would like to return to Dallas. It seems like he really did find a home there this past season. Um, like that's generally a positive situation. Dallas has a ton of scoring talent up and down the lineup. They have young players on the way, all the rest of it. And I mean, even if he goes somewhere else, like it's going to be because he's chasing dollars and even more deployment. So you'd think that that could potentially even be a positive depending on where he does go. But overall, like the fact that a bunch of different coaches have now given him less ice time, 19 minutes, 18, 17, and then down to 16:45 this past year. The 74% IPP this past year was his highest going back to his Ottawa days. I had to remember for myself that he was even on Ottawa at some point. That was a while back already. It's really hard to predict his shooting percentage, as I mentioned, or his on ice shooting percentage, just because of the ups and downs that he has. The last 2 seasons, I will say, it does feel like we've set a lower plateau for the shots and the individual scoring chances for per 60 compared to his best season in Nashville. And then also his Corsi for per 60 and scoring chances for per 60 have decreased from his Nashville days as well, which is a little bit surprising considering, who like Dallas is a pretty talented team, good system there. But overall, I just am not excited about Duchene. I feel like there's every chance that he goes down to like 50 points next year, as there is. He repeats at a 65-point pace, regardless of where he goes. So it feels like a good out on a player, but maybe I'm just burned once too many times by Matt Duchene. What do you think, Josh?
Man, yeah. I mean, you're speaking my language. Matt Duchene is such a weird player.
Yeah.
And he tricks me every year. Like, not even necessarily in draft season. Like, I think I was off of him in draft season this past year, just because. I mean, despite the good situation in Dallas, it seemed like he was pretty low on the depth chart. So I didn't really see there being a great opportunity for him to have a ton of ice time. So that ice time drop, it was kind of predictable. But at the same time, I mean, that line of him, Tyler Seguin, and Mason Marchment were red hot for a good chunk of the year, and he was honestly he was in on a lot of the points. This back half of the season was a lot more dry for Matt Duchene, and I say that as a guy that picked him up in the couple and just kept riding him because he was on the Dallas Stars. I actually dropped Jamie Benn for him, and that really hurt me. That was really bad. I'm very upset that I ended up doing that. But yeah, I think Duchene definitely in a dynasty league. I would be moving off of him if I at all can. I think he's the epitome of a hot and cold streamer level player, like premium streamer level player in a redraft league. So that's probably not a guy that yeah, I mean, the unpredictability is there. You've said it. I think while he's at a high, you gotta offload him here.
Yeah. Yeah, I just generally think that this brand of player, like you're presented with a high, sell high opportunity, you should probably take it. The guy's 33 years old. He's not getting any younger. This is probably as good of an out as you're going to get. All right, Josh, that's the main list, but I know you've got some guys or just a general brand of player that you might be looking to sell in dynasty markets. So take me through a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think at this point when the playoffs are still going on, I'm looking for players that have hot playoff performances, or at least guys that people are horny for in the playoffs, like the big storylines that people are paying attention to. A guy that I'd look at to sell on, and maybe it's a little unconventional, but that's Logan Stankoven. So he's kind of the hot new player, especially in Dallas. It looks like Dallas may be done. We'll see. I don't know. They need a big third period, but Logan Stankoven came onto the scene near the end of the year, was extremely productive, and then has been fairly productive in the playoffs as well. He's been up and down the lineup, but he's a guy that I don't. We talked about the offensive depth in Dallas. I don't see him getting a consistent top six and top power play opportunity next year, or even in the foreseeable future. You've got Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, and Jamie Benn as a net front guy. I don't really see Stankoven as a net front guy. He's pretty small. He's tenacious, but I don't really see him playing the net front. And then you've got Wyatt Johnston in the wings. He's not. He doesn't have a consistent spot on power play one, but it seems like he is the heir apparent to whenever Pavelski retires or they move him down the lineup. So I just don't see there being a spot for Stankoven to get consistent opportunity there. So that's a guy that I would probably move off on, just because I don't see his ceiling being super high for at least the next few years. He's a guy that I'm pretty excited about going forward. But yeah, like I watch for playoff storylines. I watch for whatever Ron McLean or Elliot Friedman or Jeff Merrick, whatever players they're talking about. Look at their underlying numbers. If they aren't exactly lining up to what you're seeing on the score sheet, on the box score, then I'm looking to move off of those dynasty guys right away, because there's going to be some people in your league that are excited to pick up whatever hot name is out there for the playoffs.
Yeah, I do think that's a good point. Just overall, if you can capitalize on some playoff hype, like it's a time when everybody's watching the same teams. If you see the guy who's getting all the Twitter hype, who's getting all the national attention this time of year, then it might be a prudent move to get out on that player at this time. I do think that we're going to have to contend with some serious Wyatt Johnston love in our drafts next year for redrafts. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I love Wyatt Johnston, the player, just remarkable underlying stats. I think he's truly tremendous on like a superstar trajectory this far in his career. But again, it's Dallas. We've seen what they do at the minutes, how they spread it around. We've seen Jason Robertson have a 100-point season and then that go away in a hurry. So how consistent can you expect Wyatt Johnston's production to actually be over the next number of years, even if you do project him to continue his ascent to stardom? So there's definitely some interesting pieces in a spot like Dallas and on all of the teams that are still going on at this point. You definitely should be taking a look. Think about who people are really excited about at this time, just because of some playoff performances. How sustainable are those playoff performances? Is it just because it is the playoffs and so they're riding the top six or the top line even more than normal, and so they're getting even more opportunity? And throughout the course of a season, they might take back some of those minutes. There's definitely a lot to be thinking about this time of year. So I do think that's a good take overall, but I do think that's all that we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which is a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band there for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.